The rain hammered against the windows of the small coffee shop in downtown Seattle as Sarah Martinez wiped down tables for the third time that evening. At 28, she had learned to find peace in routine tasks, something that helped quiet the memories that still haunted her from her 8 years as a Navy SEAL. Most people who walked into the coffee shop sought a petite woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. They had no idea that those same hands that carefully crafted their lattes had once handled military-grade weapons with deadly precision. Sarah had opened Harbor Grounds 6 months ago using her military savings and a small business loan. The coffee shop sat in a quiet neighborhood, far from the chaos she had known in Afghanistan and Iraq. She chose the location carefully, close enough to the naval station Puget Sound that she occasionally served fellow veterans, but tucked away enough that she could live quietly. The transition from military life to civilian life had been harder than any mission she had ever completed. That Tuesday evening in November started like any other. Sarah was preparing to close when she heard the bell above the door chime. She looked up to see a man in his 40s wearing a worn leather jacket and jeans. His eyes darted around the shop nervously, and something about his posture made Sarah's trained instincts kick in immediately. She had learned to read people during her years in special operations, and this man was broadcasting danger signals. "We're about to close," Sarah said calmly, her hand moving casually toward the counter where she kept a small knife hidden beneath the register. "But I can make you something quick." The man ignored her offer and walked closer to the counter. His right hand was buried deep in his jacket pocket, and Sarah could see the outline of something metallic. "You Sarah Martinez?" he asked, his voice rough and demanding. Sarah's military training kicked in instantly. She knew she was facing a threat, but she maintained her calm exterior. "Depends who's asking," she replied, her body shifting slightly into a defensive stance that most people wouldn't recognize as anything more than casual movement. The man pulled his hand from his pocket, revealing a small black pistol. "I'm asking," he said, pointing the weapon directly at her head. "And you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do." Sarah's mind immediately went to work, calculating distances, exit routes, and potential weapons. The coffee shop suddenly felt smaller, the space between them charged with tension. She had faced armed enemies before, but this was different. This was supposed to be her safe place, her new life away from violence and war. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the gun pointed at her face. She kept her hands visible, appearing cooperative while her mind raced through tactical options. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Your boyfriend Marcus Thompson thinks he can mess with the wrong people and just walk away. He owes my boss $50,000, and he's been dodging us for weeks. But we know all about you, Sarah. We know where you work, where you live, what time you go to bed each night." Sarah felt confusion mixed with her alertness. "I don't know anyone named Marcus Thompson," she said truthfully. "I think you have the wrong person." The man's finger moved closer to the trigger. "Don't lie to me. We followed him here 3 times last month. Watch him kiss you goodbye. Watch him leave his car in your parking lot overnight. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your boyfriend, tell him to bring our money, or something very bad is going to happen to you." Sarah realized with growing concern that someone had been watching her coffee shop without her knowledge. The idea that she had been under surveillance while believing she was safe made her angry. But, more importantly, she knew with absolute certainty that she had never met anyone named Marcus Thompson. Someone was using her as bait in a scheme she didn't understand. "I'm telling you the truth," Sarah said firmly. "I don't know this Marcus person. Someone gave you bad information." The man's face darkened. "Then, maybe you need some motivation to remember." He took a step closer, the gun now only 3 feet from her head. "My boss doesn't like it when people waste his time. And he really doesn't like it when people lie to him." Sarah's training told her that the situation was escalating beyond negotiation. The man was clearly committed to his story about Marcus Thompson, and no amount of explanation was going to change his mind. She needed to make a decision about how to handle this threat. Her years of military experience had taught her that sometimes the only way to stop violence was to act first and ask questions later. The coffee shop fell silent, except for the sound of rain against the windows. Sarah could smell the man's nervous sweat mixed with cigarette smoke. She noticed his grip on the gun was tight, but not professional. He was dangerous, but not highly trained. That gave her an advantage, but only if she moved at exactly the right moment. "Look," Sarah said, slowly reaching for her phone with her left hand while keeping her right hand visible. "Let me try to call this Marcus person. Maybe I know him by a different name." The man nodded, pleased that she seemed to be cooperating. "That's smart thinking. But don't try anything clever. I've done this before." Sarah knew he was lying about having experience. Everything about his body language and weapon handling told her he was nervous and probably desperate. That made him more dangerous in some ways, but also more predictable. As she reached for her phone, she was already planning her next 3 moves. The stranger had no idea that he had just threatened one of the most highly trained soldiers in the United States military. He thought he was intimidating a helpless coffee shop owner. He had no clue that Sarah Martinez had completed missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, or that she had been trained to handle threats exactly like him. Sarah's fingers closed around her phone, and she began to formulate a plan that would end this situation quickly and permanently. The man with the gun thought he held all the power, but he was about to learn what happens when you threaten Navy SEAL. Sarah's phone screen lit up as she pretended to scroll through her contacts, buying herself precious seconds to assess the situation more thoroughly. The armed man shifted his weight impatiently, and she noticed he favored his left leg slightly, an old injury that could slow his reaction time. His breathing was shallow and quick, signs of adrenaline and inexperience with high-stress confrontations. "Hurry up," the man demanded, waving the gun slightly. "Find his number." Sarah had made her decision. In one fluid motion that took less than 2 seconds, she hurled her phone directly at the man's face while simultaneously dropping behind the counter. The phone struck him squarely in the nose, causing him to flinch backward and fire wildly. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the small coffee shop, shattering the front window and sending glass cascading onto the street. Before the man could recover his balance, Sarah had already retrieved the tactical knife she kept hidden beneath the register. Her military training had conditioned her to move without thinking when under fire, and muscle memory took over completely. She rolled to her left, staying low, and came up behind the espresso machine, where she had a clear line of sight to her attacker. The man was cursing loudly, blood streaming from his nose where the phone had connected. He was swinging the gun wildly, trying to locate Sarah behind the counter. "Come out here," he shouted. "You just made this a lot worse for yourself." Sarah knew she had the tactical advantage now. The man was injured, disoriented, and operating on panic instead of training. She also knew that the gunshot would bring police within minutes, which meant she needed to end this quickly. From her crouched position, she could see the man's legs beneath the counter display case. "Last chance," the man yelled. "Come out now, or I start shooting everything in this place." Sarah made her move. She exploded upward from behind the counter, her knife leading the way. The man spun toward her, but his reaction time was too slow. Sarah's blade found his wrist holding the gun, slicing deep enough to sever tendons and force his fingers to release their grip. The pistol clattered to the floor as the man screamed in pain and shock. Before he could even process what had happened, Sarah had swept his legs and driven him face first into the tile floor. She pinned his good arm behind his back using a joint lock technique that would break his shoulder if he struggled too hard. The entire encounter had taken less than 15 seconds from start to finish. "Stay down," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. "Move, and I'll break your arm." The man groaned beneath her, his wounded wrist bleeding steadily onto the floor. "You're crazy," he gasped. "Do you know what you just did? My boss is going to kill you for this." Sarah applied slightly more pressure to the joint lock, causing him to cry out. "Tell me about your boss," she demanded. "Who is he, and why does he think I know Marcus Thompson?" The man's resistance crumbled quickly under the combination of pain and shock. Vincent Corsetti, he admitted, he runs money-lending operations all over the city. Thompson borrowed big money and disappeared. Vincent's guys followed him here last month, watched him with you multiple times. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together, but she still didn't understand the full picture. I've never met Marcus Thompson, she repeated firmly. Describe him. Between gasps of pain, the man provided a description that meant nothing to Sarah. Medium height, brown hair, expensive clothes, drove a silver BMW. She had definitely never met anyone matching that description, which meant either the surveillance had been wrong or someone had been deliberately using her coffee shop as cover for something. The sound of sirens grew louder as police responded to reports of gunfire. Sarah knew she needed to control the narrative before law enforcement arrived. She reached for the gun on the floor, carefully picking it up with her sleeve to preserve fingerprints while making sure it was no longer a threat. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah told her prisoner. When the police arrive, you're going to tell them exactly what you told me. You threatened an innocent person because of bad information from your boss. You fired a weapon in a public place. You're going to cooperate completely. The man nodded frantically, clearly wanting to avoid any additional pain. Blood from his wrist wound had formed a growing puddle on the floor, and his face was pale from shock and blood loss. 3 police cars arrived simultaneously, their flashing lights painting the coffee shop in alternating red and blue. Sarah could hear officers taking positions outside, preparing for what they expected to be an active shooter situation. Seattle police, a voice shouted through the broken window. Everyone inside, come out with your hands visible. Sarah carefully released the pressure on her prisoner's arm and stepped back, raising her hands high above her head. 1 injured suspect on the ground, she called back. 1 civilian. Weapon is secured on the floor. The next few minutes passed in a blur of shouted commands and careful movements as police officers entered the coffee shop with weapons drawn. Sarah followed their instructions precisely, knowing that any sudden movements could be misinterpreted in the tense atmosphere. Within minutes, the gunman was in handcuffs and receiving medical attention for his wounded wrist. Sarah found herself sitting in the back of a police car, not under arrest, but being questioned about what had happened. Detective Ray Kowalski, a veteran investigator with graying hair and kind eyes, led the interview. So let me understand this correctly, Detective Kowalski said, reviewing his notes. This man entered your coffee shop, demanded information about someone you've never met, and threatened you with a weapon? Sarah nodded. That's exactly what happened. He seemed convinced that I was in a relationship with someone named Marcus Thompson, but I've never met anyone by that name. The detective frowned thoughtfully. And you disarmed him using military training from your time as a Navy SEAL? Basic self-defense, Sarah replied carefully. When someone points a gun at your head, you react. Detective Kowalski studied Sarah's face for a long moment. Basic self-defense doesn't usually include precision knife work and tactical restraint techniques. But given the circumstances, I'd say you showed remarkable restraint. This could have ended much worse. As EMTs loaded the wounded gunman into an ambulance, Sarah realized that her quiet new life had just become significantly more complicated. Someone named Marcus Thompson was still out there, apparently owing money to dangerous people. And those dangerous people now knew exactly where to find her. The detective closed his notebook and looked at Sarah seriously. MS. Martinez, based on what our suspect told us, this Vincent Corsetti character believes you're connected to his missing money. That means this probably isn't over. 2 days after the coffee shop incident, Sarah sat in Detective Kowalski's office at the Seattle Police Department, studying surveillance photographs spread across his desk. The images showed a man matching the description her attacker had provided. Well-dressed, confident, walking near her coffee shop on 3 separate occasions in October. We pulled these from traffic cameras and business security feeds in your neighborhood, Detective Kowalski explained. Meet Marcus Thompson, also known as Marcus Torres, Michael Thompson, and at least 4 other aliases. He's a professional con artist who specializes in romance scams and identity theft. Sarah examined the photos carefully. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, attractive in a polished way, with the kind of practiced smile that probably worked well on unsuspecting victims. I've definitely never seen him before, she confirmed. But he was clearly in my area multiple times. Detective Kowalski nodded grimly. Here's what we think happened. Thompson borrowed $50,000 from Vincent Corsetti using false identification and references. When it came time to pay back the loan, Thompson disappeared. But before he vanished, he spent time in your neighborhood, probably setting up his next scam or planning his escape route. Sarah felt anger building as she understood the implications. So Corsetti's surveillance team saw him in the area and assumed he was connected to me. I was just unlucky enough to own the nearest business. Exactly. Thompson used your coffee shop as cover, probably sitting outside in his car or walking past while conducting business on his phone. From a distance, it would look like he was visiting you regularly. The detective leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah's face. But here's the problem. Our wounded suspect is trying to reduce his charges by cooperating. He's told us that Vincent Corsetti is convinced you know where Thompson is hiding. Corsetti thinks the attack failed because Thompson warned you ahead of time. Sarah processed this information with the strategic mindset her military training had developed. So instead of realizing they had bad intelligence, they think I'm part of the scheme. Right. And Vincent Corsetti is not the kind of man who admits mistakes easily. He runs a loan sharking operation that's been connected to at least 12 violent assaults in the past 2 years. The FBI has been trying to build a case against him, but witnesses have a habit of disappearing or changing their stories. Detective Kowalski pulled out another file and opened it to reveal crime scene photos that made Sarah's stomach tighten. This is what happened to the last person who couldn't pay Corsetti back. We found him in Elliott Bay with his hands zip-tied behind his back. Sarah studied the photographs with professional detachment, her SEAL training allowing her to assess the evidence objectively. How long before Corsetti tries again? Our suspect says Corsetti gives people one chance to pay voluntarily. After that, he escalates quickly. Based on his pattern, you probably have 48 hours before he sends someone else. The detective closed the file and looked directly at Sarah. We can offer you police protection, but our resources are limited. We can't keep officers watching your coffee shop 24 hours a day indefinitely. And if Corsetti is as connected as we think he is, he'll know about any official protection we provide. Sarah had already reached the same conclusion. Police protection would be temporary at best, and it wouldn't address the root problem. As long as Vincent Corsetti believed she was connected to Marcus Thompson, she would remain a target. What about finding Thompson? Sarah asked. If we can locate him and clear up this misunderstanding, Corsetti has no reason to come after me. Detective Kowalski shook his head. Thompson is a ghost. He's probably already in another state using a different identity. The FBI has been tracking him for 18 months, and he always stays one step ahead. Besides, even if we found him, there's no guarantee Corsetti would believe you weren't working together. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline while her mind worked through options. Her military experience had taught her that sometimes the best defense was a strong offense. Instead of waiting for the next attack, maybe it was time to take the fight to Vincent Corsetti. Tell me about Corsetti's operation, Sarah said, turning back to face the detective. Where does he conduct business? Who works for him? What are his security arrangements? Detective Kowalski raised his eyebrows. Sarah, whatever you're thinking, don't. Corsetti has been operating in Seattle for over a decade. He has connections to organized crime families in 3 states. This isn't some enemy combatant you can neutralize with military tactics. Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. Detective, I spent 8 years conducting operations against enemies who had home field advantage, superior numbers, and local support. Vincent Corsetti runs a criminal organization, not an army. There are ways to approach this that don't involve direct confrontation. The detective looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was heading. Sarah, I'm asking you as a friend. Let us handle this through official channels. We're working with the FBI to build a case against Corsetti. Give us time to make arrests. Sarah appreciated the detective's concern, but she also understood something he didn't. Time was a luxury she couldn't afford. Criminal organizations like Corsetti's operated on reputation and fear. If word spread that someone had successfully resisted his threats and hurt one of his men, he would have to respond aggressively to maintain credibility. How long will it take to build your case? Sarah asked. Detective Kowalski hesitated. Honestly, could be months, maybe longer. These organizations are careful about leaving evidence. Sarah nodded, having received the answer she expected. Then, I need to solve this problem myself. The detective stood up quickly. Sarah, I can't officially support any kind of vigilante action. If you take matters into your own hands, you'll be on your own legally. Sarah understood the detective's position perfectly. He was bound by laws and procedures that didn't account for situations like this. But she wasn't a police officer anymore. She was a civilian who had been threatened by criminals, and she had both the skills and the legal right to defend herself. I understand, Sarah said, shaking the detective's hand. Thanks for all your help with this investigation. As she left the police station, Sarah's mind was already working on a plan. Vincent Corsetti thought he was dealing with a helpless coffee shop owner who could be intimidated into compliance. He had no idea that he had just made an enemy of someone trained to hunt down and eliminate threats in hostile territory. Sarah drove home slowly, taking note of every vehicle behind her and checking her mirrors regularly. If Corsetti's people were watching her, she wanted to know about it. But, more importantly, she wanted them to see her appearing nervous and scared, exactly what they would expect from their victim. Tonight, she would begin preparing for war. Sarah spent the next 18 hours conducting reconnaissance that would have impressed her former SEAL teammates. Using skills learned during covert operations in Afghanistan, she systematically mapped Vincent Corsetti's daily routine, business locations, and security measures. What she discovered was both encouraging and concerning. Corsetti operated his loan sharking business from a warehouse in Georgetown, disguised as an import-export company called Pacific Maritime Solutions. The building sat on a quiet industrial street with minimal foot traffic and no nearby residential areas, perfect for conducting illegal business without witnesses. But it also meant that any confrontation would happen on Corsetti's home territory, surrounded by his people and his advantages. Through careful observation from multiple positions, Sarah identified at least 8 men who worked for Corsetti on a regular basis. They varied in age and apparent experience, but all carried themselves with the swagger of people who were used to intimidating others through violence. None of them displayed the discipline or tactical awareness she would have expected from professional soldiers or trained bodyguards. The breakthrough came when Sarah followed one of Corsetti's men to a restaurant in Pioneer Square. While pretending to read a book at a nearby table, she overheard a phone conversation that revealed Corsetti's plan for dealing with her. He intended to send 4 men to her apartment that evening with instructions to convince her to be more cooperative. The conversation made clear that Corsetti still believed she was hiding Marcus Thompson and that violence was authorized if persuasion failed. Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her as she processed this intelligence. She had been in similar situations during her military service, outnumbered, operating without backup, facing enemies on their chosen ground. The difference was that this time, she wasn't bound by rules of engagement or military protocols. Vincent Corsetti had declared war on an innocent person, and she was free to respond accordingly. That afternoon, Sarah visited 3 different locations to acquire items she would need for the evening's operation. A hardware store provided zip ties, duct tape, and industrial cable. A sporting goods store supplied a tactical flashlight and emergency flares. A military surplus shop yielded night vision goggles and a Kevlar vest that fit beneath her civilian clothes. As the sun set over Seattle, Sarah prepared her apartment with the same methodical precision she had once used to prepare for combat missions. She moved furniture to create clear lines of sight and remove hiding places. She positioned improvised weapons at strategic locations throughout the rooms. Most importantly, she set up a recording device that would capture everything that happened when Corsetti's men arrived. At 9:15 that evening, Sarah heard footsteps on the stairs leading to her second-floor apartment. Through the peephole, she counted 4 men exactly as the overheard conversation had indicated. They were trying to be quiet, but their movements lacked the coordination of trained professionals. These were street thugs, dangerous but predictable. The apartment fell silent as the men positioned themselves outside her door. Sarah could hear whispered conversations as they planned their approach. One of them was picking the lock while the others prepared to rush inside once entry was gained. They had no idea that their target was watching them through a pinhole camera she had installed that afternoon, tracking their every movement. Sarah positioned herself in the kitchen, where she had the best tactical advantage and multiple exit routes. She held a military-grade stun gun in one hand and her tactical knife in the other. Her Kevlar vest felt familiar and reassuring beneath her hoodie. This was the moment when months of quiet civilian life would give way to the warrior training that had been drilled into her for 8 years. The lock clicked open, and Sarah heard the door creak as it swung inward. Remember, one of the men whispered, "Corsetti wants her scared, but not permanently damaged. We need her to talk." The first man entered cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the darkness of the apartment. Sarah could see him clearly through her night vision goggles, but he was essentially blind. He signaled for his companions to follow, and within seconds, all 4 men were inside her living room, moving carefully toward what they assumed would be a helpless victim. "Sarah Martinez," one of them called out in a harsh whisper. "We know you're here. This doesn't have to be difficult. Just come out and talk to us." Sarah waited until all 4 men had moved past the kitchen doorway before she acted. The first target never saw her coming. The stun gun dropped him instantly, his body convulsing as electricity overloaded his nervous system. Before the others could react, Sarah had already moved to her second target, her knife slicing through the tendons in his wrist exactly as she had done at the coffee shop. The remaining 2 men spun toward her, but they were operating in near darkness while Sarah could see perfectly through her night vision equipment. She threw her tactical flashlight with enough force to shatter the nose of the third attacker, then closed distance with the fourth before he could draw his weapon. The final confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. Sarah used a combination of joint locks and pressure points to disable her opponent without causing permanent injury, then zip-tied his hands behind his back while he was still stunned from the impact with her apartment floor. Within 5 minutes of their entry, all 4 of Corsetti's men were secured and disarmed. Sarah had confiscated 2 handguns, a knife, and a telescoping baton. More importantly, she had recorded evidence of 4 armed men breaking into her apartment with criminal intent. The recording device had captured their whispered conversations, including direct references to Vincent Corsetti and their instructions to intimidate her. Sarah dragged the conscious attackers into her living room and arranged them so they could see each other. The man she had stunned was beginning to regain awareness, while the one with the broken nose was moaning softly through the duct tape she had placed over his mouth. All 4 were bleeding from various injuries, but none were in life-threatening condition. "Gentlemen," Sarah said calmly, removing her night vision goggles so they could see her face clearly. "You came here tonight to intimidate someone you thought was helpless. You were wrong about that. Now you're going to help me send a message to your boss." The least injured of the 4 men glared at her defiantly. "You have no idea what you just did," he said through swollen lips. "Vincent Corsetti doesn't forget things like this. He'll hunt you down wherever you go." Sarah smiled and activated a recording app on her phone, holding it where all 4 men could see the screen clearly. "That's interesting. Tell me more about Vincent Corsetti's plans to hunt me down. I'm recording this conversation, and I think the FBI would find it very educational." The defiant expression faded from the man's face as he realized the implications. Sarah had not only defeated them physically, but she was also gathering evidence that could destroy their entire organization. This was not how the evening was supposed to unfold. For the next 2 hours, Sarah systematically interviewed each of Corsetti's men while recording their responses. Her military interrogation training proved invaluable as she extracted detailed information about the criminal organization's structure, operations, and planned activities. The men, facing serious felony charges and nursing painful injuries, became increasingly cooperative as they realized the scope of evidence being gathered against them. By midnight, Sarah had documented enough criminal activity to keep federal prosecutors busy for months. The recordings included admissions of loan sharking, extortion, witness intimidation, and conspiracy charges. More importantly, she had obtained detailed information about Vincent Corsetti's current location and security arrangements. Sarah called Detective Kowalski at 1 in the morning, waking him from deep sleep. "Detective, this is Sarah Martinez. I need you to come to my apartment right away. I have 4 men here who broke in tonight with weapons and criminal intent. I've detained them for you, and I have recordings of their confessions to multiple felonies." There was a long pause before Detective Kowalski responded. "Sarah, please tell me you didn't do what I think you did." "I defended myself against armed intruders in my own home," Sarah replied calmly. "Everything I did was completely legal under Washington State's self-defense laws. These men are all alive and have received basic medical attention for their injuries. I've documented everything they told me about Vincent Corsetti's criminal organization." Detective Kowalski arrived 20 minutes later with backup officers and paramedics. The scene in Sarah's apartment looked like the aftermath of a military operation, which in many ways it was. 4 zip-tied suspects sat against the wall, their weapons arranged on the coffee table next to a digital recorder containing hours of incriminating evidence. "How did you manage this without killing any of them?" Detective Kowalski asked quietly as paramedics examined the injured man. Sarah shrugged. "Military training emphasizes neutralizing threats with minimum necessary force. I needed them conscious and cooperative, not dead." The detective listened to portions of the recorded confessions while his officers processed the crime scene. "This is incredible," he admitted. "These guys have given us enough evidence to dismantle Corsetti's entire organization. The FBI is going to be very interested in this material." Sarah handed him a flash drive containing copies of all the recordings. "There's something else. Based on what these men told me, Vincent Corsetti is planning to leave Seattle tomorrow night. He's been using his import business to launder money for East Coast crime families, and he thinks the heat is getting too intense here." Detective Kowalski frowned as he processed this information. If Corsetti runs, he'll just set up operations somewhere else, and he'll still believe you cost him his Seattle business. Sarah nodded grimly. "Which means this problem doesn't end until Vincent Corsetti is in prison or convinced that pursuing me is more dangerous than leaving me alone." The detective studied Sarah's face carefully. "What are you planning?" Sarah had already made her decision during the long interrogation session. Vincent Corsetti represented a continuing threat not only to her, but to future victims in whatever city he chose for his next operation. Her military oath had included a commitment to protect innocent people from enemies foreign and domestic. As far as she was concerned, Vincent Corsetti qualified as a domestic enemy. "I'm planning to end this tonight," Sarah said simply, "before he can run and before he can hurt anyone else." Detective Kowalski shook his head firmly. "Sarah, I cannot and will not support any kind of vigilante action against Vincent Corsetti. If you move against him outside the law, you'll be on your own." Sarah understood the detective's position, but she also understood something he didn't. The legal system was designed to handle conventional criminals who operated within predictable patterns. Vincent Corsetti was a threat that required unconventional solutions, and she had both the skills and the moral authority to provide those solutions. At 3 in the morning, after the last of Corsetti's men had been loaded into police vehicles, Sarah began preparing for her final operation. She changed into dark clothing and tactical gear, checked her weapons and equipment, and reviewed the intelligence she had gathered about Corsetti's warehouse location. The drive to Georgetown took 20 minutes through empty Seattle streets. Sarah parked 6 blocks away from Pacific Maritime Solutions and approached the warehouse on foot, using shadows and industrial equipment to mask her movement. Her reconnaissance from the previous day had revealed the locations of security cameras and motion sensors, allowing her to navigate around them without triggering alarms. Vincent Corsetti was exactly where his men had said he would be, in the warehouse office, frantically packing documents and cash in preparation for his planned departure. Through the office window, Sarah could see him working alone, apparently confident that his security measures were adequate protection. Sarah entered the warehouse through a loading dock that had been left unlocked, moving silently through stacks of shipping containers toward the office area. Her night vision goggles revealed the interior layout clearly, and she identified several positions that would provide tactical advantages if the situation required armed confrontation. Vincent Corsetti was a man in his 50s, heavy-set and soft-looking, clearly more accustomed to giving orders than engaging in physical confrontation. He wore expensive clothes and gold jewelry that spoke to the profitability of his criminal enterprises. When Sarah stepped into his office doorway, he looked up with the annoyed expression of someone who expected to see one of his subordinates. "What are you doing here?" Corsetti demanded. "I told everyone to stay away tonight while I finish packing." Sarah stepped into the light, where Corsetti could see her clearly. His expression changed from annoyance to shock to fear in the span of 3 seconds. "Hello, Vincent," she said calmly. "I believe you've been looking for me." Corsetti's hand moved toward a desk drawer, but Sarah's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Your 4 men tried the same thing earlier tonight. They're all in police custody now, along with recordings of everything they told me about your organization." The color drained from Corsetti's face as he processed the implications. "You're Sarah Martinez," he said slowly. "That's right. The woman you've been trying to intimidate and threaten. The woman whose life you've been making hell because of your own bad business decisions." Sarah moved closer to the desk, keeping her hands visible but ready to react if Corsetti made any sudden movements. "Here's what's going to happen, Vincent. You're going to sit down and listen very carefully to what I have to say. Your survival depends on how well you understand the message I'm about to give you." Vincent Corsetti, who had built his reputation on inspiring fear in others, found himself looking into the eyes of someone who had faced down far more dangerous enemies than anything Seattle's criminal underworld could produce. For the first time in years, he was the one feeling afraid. Sarah smiled, and there was nothing friendly about it. "Let's discuss your future, Vincent. What's left of it.